Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Create and Consume, a podcast about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. Today's episode is honestly, I think, the pep talk that I need to hear today, so maybe some of you are in the same boat. I want to talk about what we can do today to just absolutely kill it for the rest of 2024 and get as many of our goals accomplished as we possibly can. Yes, those goals we set back in January can seem daunting, especially if you're not really that close to hitting them. But I just feel like there's no reason to wait till January, to wait another 8 to 9 weeks to hit the reset button and restart. I think there's still so much we can do if we just choose to lock in for 60 days and focus on what we really want. So today's episode is going to help you get motivated, get inspired, and finish the year strong. Before we dive into today's topic, let's talk about what I've been creating and consuming this week. And I would love to hear from you about what you are creating and consuming as well. You can always leave comments on our Instagram or TikTok. It's at Create and Consume Pod. You can leave a comment down below if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, or you can always send me an email or a DM to my personal accounts. Whatever your favorite way of communicating is, because honestly, I know that this is my podcast, but I really want to hear from you all as well. In terms of what I've been creating this week, I have kind of been more inspired with short form lately, and I did a collaboration with Caitlin last week that I thought was really fun. So this was entirely Caitlin's idea. She found this video on Reels that was basically two girls like filming each other just out getting coffee. It was like a best friend aesthetic kind of thing. And sadly, I did not get to see Caitlin in person for this one, but basically we each filmed on our own, me here in Hoboken and her in Chicago, and I sent her my footage and she thankfully was creative directing and editing and doing all of the things to put this reel together and make it a successful collaboration. But yeah, I will link the collab on Instagram down below. It is a really short video. It's like less than 10 seconds. So if you have a minute, go give it a watch. Let us know what you think. It definitely reminds me that there are ways I can collaborate with people, even if they're not like sitting right next to me. And I definitely want to do more collaborations and crossover content with other creators in the future. And then as far as what I'm consuming this week, I am currently on pause with postseason baseball. The Mets season has ended. I will be rooting for the Yankees from here on out because Andrew is a Yankees fan, and I'm mad at the Dodgers for eliminating the Mets. So that's where I'm at on that front. The Giants are just disappointing me week over week, and my sister-in-law beat me in fantasy by 1 point. And I texted her this morning and I was like, we're in a fight, just so you know. I have to defend my crown because I won last year. I said this last week, but like there is just so much to watch, I think, this time of year. But things are getting meta this week. So what I want to share for what I'm consuming this week is actually me watching one of the Game of Roses podcast co-hosts watch Love is Blind. So I'm actually watching Chad from Game of Roses watch Love is Blind and give his commentary on it. If you're interested, it is under the Game of Roses Patreon. I will link it in the show notes, and it is just so entertaining. It's like if you don't have a friend to watch the show with, or you kind of wish there was someone in real time to like, make a comment or like discuss, because that, as I have talked about on this podcast, is my favorite part of reality television, is not just like watching it, but discussing it with others. It's just been so enjoyable. Like I at first was watching the episodes come out on Netflix and then I was watching him watch it, and now I've transitioned to like I'm just going to watch his version of it so I don't have to watch the episodes twice, because that was getting a little chaotic to say the least, but I've definitely been enjoying that. With that being said, let's get into today's topic of conversation and talk about locking it in for the next 60 days to get our goals accomplished by 2025. And if you are just feeling like totally drained by this year, if it's been a hard year for you, or you just feel like things have been changing and switching around on you, I just want to first say I can totally relate. I feel like, especially being self-employed, there are always different targets and milestones and goals that I want to hit. And sometimes I have to deal with life just as much as I have to deal with work. And while the two coexist pretty nicely, that doesn't mean that things don't get messy and overlap sometimes. So if you're at that point where you're just really wishing that you had gotten more done this year, I just want this episode to convey the message that the hope is not lost and that there's still stuff that you can do this year to make you back in January proud. You know what I mean? So, of course, I think the first thing to do for yourself is to check in with yourself, see how you're doing, and check in on your goals. And I say check in with yourself first because I do think it's just important to do a little check in with you. I mean, if you're not doing that, who else is going to be doing that? I know for me personally, I recently resumed therapy because I just felt really mentally drained more than anything. Like things weren't necessarily straight up bad in my life, but they were just feeling a little overwhelming. And I was feeling like I wanted more of a designated outlet to put towards my feelings, like a designated time, a designated person to listen to me just babble on about whatever was on my mind that week. That's maybe a touch more personal than what I share on the podcast. I guess you guys signed up to do that for free. But anyway, that's not something that I felt like I needed in January, but it was something I really felt like I needed come August, September. And checking in with yourself can also just mean do you have a good morning routine in place? Are you feeling good about your relationships and your friendships? Is there anything in your life that you currently love and that you want to do more of? Or is there anything in your life that you feel like you're lacking in terms of support or motivation or resources to actually get things done? And then once you kind of identify what's going well and what isn't going well, I feel like that's the first part of it before you even get to your goal list or get to your to-do list. You could even choose to just journal for 10 minutes about any of these topics and see what you come back with. You might be surprised. Once you feel like you're in a good headspace to tackle your goals, whether you have identified things that you can immediately improve, or if you're just going to do some morning affirmations or speak kindly to yourself, whatever that really looks like for you, then you can move on and check in on your goals. Also, you guys, I'm so sorry if you hear any squeaking. I'm trying my hardest not to move a muscle, which I feel like is really hard for me, even though I'm just sitting and talking. I'm pretty sure I've had this desk chair since we've lived in this apartment. So it's 3 years old, and I don't know what it is, but it's just gotten so squeaky. Even involuntary deep breaths that I take, I don't know if you just can hear it. I don't know. I just feel like it is squeaking up a storm and it's driving me personally crazy. So I hope to God you guys aren't hearing that too. Anyway, when it's time to sit down and reevaluate the goals that you set at the beginning of the year, now is a good time to think about if those goals are still all relevant, if there are any goals that you don't feel passionately about anymore, or you've noticed your priorities have shifted and a goal that you set in January doesn't really make sense for you to follow through with come the end of the year. And I feel like people go back and forth about this, oh, shouldn't you see a goal through until the very end? But I believe that we continue to change and evolve as people, and as a result, it's okay if your goals change and evolve too. We talked about this in the episode I did called How to Pivot from a few weeks ago, but I recently decided to change the direction of my YouTube channel to incorporate more lifestyle content so I can talk to a broader audience beyond just content creators, and so that I can be more creative on my channel and talk about more topics versus feeling like I am in a box that I essentially put myself in. That just wasn't feeling good, and I wanted to get out of it really quickly. So I very quickly filmed a channel update. I got that up, and since I posted that video, I have been posting content that feels good to me and content that makes me happy. As I continue to try to tackle more creative ideas and bigger projects, it might mean that I'm not as consistent on YouTube. So if that was a goal I set for myself back in January, but partway through the year, I realized that being consistent was just killing me creatively, then it's not going to make me feel better to know I was consistent for consistency's sake by the end of the year. It would make me feel better to know that I put out some really strong videos that I absolutely loved and that made me feel creative and that felt good to put out to other people. And even if there were only 3 videos over the course of the next 2 months, I would rather 3 videos that I totally stand behind and feel really proud of versus 8 videos that I forced myself to make just for the sake of making them. Another thing to ask yourself is, are there still goals that you can continue to work towards? I would focus on identifying goals that you still want to continue to work towards and that feel reasonable for you to accomplish within 60 days. And even if you can't accomplish the whole thing, can you get 20% of the goal done, or 40%, or 50%? I think you'll feel much better putting in any effort than looking back and realizing that that goal somehow didn't manage to land a spot on your to-do list for a whole year. I mean, if that's the case, it's probably not that important of a goal. But if you found things have popped up, like let's just say that this was the year you really wanted to launch your podcast and that just hasn't happened yet. Like you have the idea in your head, but you don't know the name, you don't know the branding, you don't know what mic to get, like you don't know all of the steps that go into actually creating and producing a podcast, which I was in the same boat earlier this year. I didn't know any of that. I'm just teaching myself as I go. But let's just say that you wanted to start a podcast and you have not done a single thing for it yet. My recommendation there would be don't worry about full on launching the podcast yet, but can you narrow down a name? Can you pick like 3 brand colors that you think would be good for your podcast? It doesn't have to be the finished product and you can always change things later, but just giving yourself some kind of starting point will put you further in your progress towards the goal than you would be if you just sat around and didn't do anything. Again, if you review your goals and you realize some things are just not as important to you as you thought they were, you can always bump them to the next year. But when you do find those couple of goals that you're saying, I really feel like if I focus the next few weeks, I can make a dent in these at the very least. The next thing that you should do is make a plan. Set a plan in place and write out all of the most important action items that you can do to start moving forward on those goals. For me, for example, a few weeks ago, I was looking out at Q4 and I was like, I know I have a lot I need to get done, but like I couldn't tell you today like what the actual things are that I needed to do. So what I ended up doing was making a spreadsheet over in Notion. I actually share a walkthrough of this, like a visual walkthrough in one of my recent YouTube videos. So I will link that in the show notes in case you'd like to go look at what I'm talking about. Essentially, I wrote down 5 platforms/areas of my business that I really want to focus on for the rest of Q4 and exactly what specific tasks I wanted to do related to those areas of my business. So, for example, I want to launch 2 new products for my Etsy shop in Q4. As of right now, I need to start doing product research for the first one that I'm thinking of, just make sure that all of the keywords are right and that I can package it nicely and see if other people are selling similar products so I can get a sense of whether or not I think this product will actually sell. And those are all reasonable action steps I can take that aren't just create a new Etsy product. Like that in itself has a million subtasks in it that I need to make sure I am checking off and getting done. And it's not like the product is already done and I can just upload it to Etsy, not think about my description, not think about my cover photos and see what happens. Like that's not really how it works. So even though I have launched an Etsy product on my to-do list, I know what the next action steps are to actually make that happen. So that is a more complicated task, but then I am switching ad networks for my blog, and that change is happening early next week. So when my contract with one company is up, and I can use the ad code for the new company that I'm working with, I basically just have to make sure I go and add that code to my blog. That is hopefully something that I can do within an hour or two or just in one afternoon. And the reason I know that is because within this spreadsheet, I also went in and designated a priority to the task and how much energy of mine it would take. So for priority, I put urgent, somewhat urgent, or not urgent. And then for energy level, I put low, medium, or high. So a low energy task is like installing my new blog code. A high energy task would be developing and publishing a new product on Etsy. And if you find you have things on this list that are not urgent and also not that important to you, like that you don't feel like making the time for, I would call that not a priority. And I would just move that task off of your list so that you don't stare at it and feel bad about not doing it if it's not actually that important to you. If you're having trouble deciding which goals to focus on or what you should be doing, another tip that I have is to really just double down on what's working. And this is a tip that I have followed throughout various different parts of my business, from creating my course and then asking for student feedback and incorporating more of what they liked into the program, to figuring out which YouTube videos were doing well and creating more similar videos to attract more of an audience and build up my watch time. A recent example of how I did this in my business is through my blog. So I went into my blog and narrowed down the top 10 blog posts from the last 90 days. And I challenged myself to think of 3 blog posts related to that first post that did well. So, one of my top performing posts for the month on my blog has been 20 ways to style ankle boots. So, I basically wrote a sequel blog post to that, and I did the best ways to style tall boots. And that blog post has actually been one of my top posts in terms of traffic for this month. It's a newer blog post, but it's still ranking in search. And I think it's because Google recognized me as an expert on the topic of ankle boots. And so once I published the article about tall boots too, it was also kind of equally pushing that higher in the search results and ranking it in their algorithm. And then another similar example from my blog is a post that's done well for me over the last year was my New York City bachelorette itinerary. So I created 2 related posts. One that was the best bachelorette weekend activities. So for anyone who's planning a bachelorette, doesn't have to be in New York City. I wrote out 15 activities that, some are typical bachelorette activities and others are a little bit more like laid back or creative activities in case people needed inspiration while planning. And then another question that came up from my New York City bachelorette weekend blog post was about the custom bridal Jeopardy game that I created for myself. So I actually created a whole separate post just about that. And that has been a popular post on my site in the last few months, with a good amount of the traffic actually coming from Pinterest because I shared images of that game and people are clicking through and getting the exact instructions for how to make the game, sample questions, even down to the exact envelopes that I ordered and the exact poster board. So people didn't have to worry about the sizing and how everything would fit on the board. Even by creating these related blog posts, I have increased the traffic on my blog, thereby increasing my revenue from ads and my revenue from affiliates, which has been a great source of additional income. I think that especially when you're self-employed, but honestly in any job, sometimes doubling down on what's working can not only yield you better results, but also conserve your energy so that you're not spending energy in places that it doesn't really need to be spent, or on things that are not really priorities and that are not really moving the needle. Doubling down on what's working can come in lots of different forms. So maybe that even just means scheduling certain tasks during certain times of the day to maximize your energy levels and when you are most focused. I'm currently reading this book, Uptime by Laura Mae Martin. I probably have mentioned it on the podcast before, and God, I'm just feeling like the slowest reader alive right now. For some reason, I have just been a little bit out of my reading routine, and I have been honestly more so distracted with lots of different thoughts and things for YouTube. So I feel like I have just been getting through that book so slowly. But she does speak in that book about the idea of power hours and designating, the tasks that require the most focus and the ones that are the most important to the time of day when you're most alert and on it, so to speak. So I know for me, that's usually morning. I am currently recording the podcast in the afternoon, which to me is good in some ways because it kind of gives me a little bit of momentum from the beginning of the day. And it's not like I have to sit here analyzing a spreadsheet or writing the next great American novel. I kind of just get to come and sit and chat. But I also sometimes podcast in the late mornings too. So I feel like just knowing that these are the times of day that are best for me to do something kind of similar to that type of task, it's just good to know, because that means I'm not scheduling podcast recordings for 7 a.m. when I have probably only had half of one cup of coffee and I don't have my thoughts together and I look like I just woke up. And like on the other end of the spectrum, for example, I can't imagine recording the podcast anytime after 4 p.m. I would say that by 4 p.m., I want to be mainly focused on more administrative tasks that don't require me being alert and super chatty. So, more things like editing, answering emails, replying to comments, and stuff like that. Next up, I think it's time to eliminate distractions. And to be totally honest, by distractions, I just mean your phone. And to me, that is my personal biggest distraction. Sometimes I look at like my time spent on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and I'm just like, in what world, like, where did that time come from? And I just don't understand what part of my day got sucked out, like that much of it, by one of those apps, but usually they are the main culprit. So I have a couple ideas for how to limit distractions if you notice your phone is becoming a problem for you, like it has for me, honestly, sometimes. So the first thing is just moving your phone physically away from where you are. And for me, this has been as simple as just putting it on the kitchen counter so that if I'm sitting here working, I would have to like actually go get up in order to check it. And honestly, sometimes that is enough of, I don't really feel like doing that for me to prevent me from scrolling mindlessly. The thought of me having to leave my squeaky but comfy chair, get up, go all the way over to the kitchen counter, and then either choose to stand there because I am trying to leave my phone over there, or being bad and bringing my phone back to my desk where it's going to distract me further. Like, even just doing that mental game before I've gotten up is enough for me to say, I don't really need to check this right now. So I'm just going to stay here. I would definitely start with that if you find that you are just scrolling when you want to be focused and want to be productive. On top of that, I am a fan of using Do Not Disturb. And before you say, oh, I can't use Do Not Disturb, like I need to be reachable and accessible, I have some Do Not Disturb tips that I think will help. So, first of all, you don't need to go on Do Not Disturb for the rest of your life. In fact, you could turn Do Not Disturb on for an hour when you're doing a task that ideally you don't want interrupted unless it's like a true emergency. For example, I am on Do Not Disturb right now on both my phone and my laptop as I record this podcast, so that even if I get texts rolling in, no one has texted me since I've started recording this in the last 30 minutes, which is honestly fine with me. Like, that's okay. That way, I'm not seeing a text pop up in the top right corner of my screen and getting distracted. That is something to keep in mind, just that it doesn't have to be permanent, even if it just means that you're getting an hour of truly focused work done. Do Not Disturb is worth it. You can always, when you look back at your phone after the hour has passed, turn it back off and go about your day. For me, though, I often find that I like leaving Do Not Disturb on for entire days if I am really trying to focus in and film something or get some kind of bigger task done that really requires my focus. And if you need to be reachable by a family member who needs you, your kids, a parent, whoever, you can allow your favorites to bypass Do Not Disturb on your phone. So I definitely have that enabled so that even when I'm on Do Not Disturb, my parents and Andrew can reach me if they need me. You can also create different Do Not Disturb modes for different people. So I have a Do Not Disturb mode for work that Caitlin can bypass because usually if we're talking throughout the day, well, maybe like 20% of the time it's Taylor Swift, 10% of the time it's like personal stuff. But honestly, sometimes it's just, hey, can I get another set of eyes on this email? Or hey, what do you think about this project that just popped up for me? So like, I have Do Not Disturb on with the work mode so that if she or I needs or wants to talk about work with each other, that we can. And then as long as it's not super pressing for work or for family, like after that, I think most messages can wait. And if you find that you're someone who gets added to a lot of different group chats, you can actually choose to mute notifications for specific group chats. Maybe you have a group chat of people from high school or friends from college or your book club or your family, whatever the case may be. If you find that that chat going off throughout the day is distracting you, you can choose to just mute notifications for that chat. And then you can check all of your chats at the end of the day. So you don't have to be actively replying throughout the day when you could be spending time getting work done. Those are my tips for do not disturb. And honestly, if you have found that distancing yourself from your phone physically has helped you and going on do not disturb has helped you, this is a bit more of like a commitment step, but I would strongly suggest just trying a social media break and see what you think of it. It could honestly even just be for a day. It could be during the work days. You just decide, I am going to be offline for like those 8 hours. Like, I don't want to be on Instagram and scrolling and stuff during the workday. Or you could choose to take a weekend off, or you could choose to take a week off or even a month. I personally took a week off from Instagram and TikTok over the summer, and I absolutely loved it. I'm sure it wasn't like quote unquote the best move for me business wise, since a lot of my business is obviously on social media, but I scheduled posts while I took my time off. So I was at least able to show up pretty much just as much as I would at least like creating actual content. What I mean by that is feed posts versus stories on the platforms. So I don't really think that it was that big of a deal for me to miss that 1 week there. And I just chose to take a break from Instagram and TikTok. I did keep Facebook, Threads, Pinterest, and YouTube. I don't know if I could ever truly take a break from YouTube because even though YouTube is social media, it's also like one of my primary forms of entertainment too. Like throughout the day, I probably will watch someone's vlog while I'm eating lunch, or I'll put something on in the background while I'm cleaning or folding laundry. So to me, that would probably be like the last one to go if I were ever doing a true like social media detox. But Instagram and TikTok have notoriously been my biggest time sucks. So those are the ones that I chose to take a week off from, and I got so much done in that week, especially for my Etsy shop. I decided to just like focus in on Alyssa's course and getting my Etsy shop launched that week, and I got so much done. It was actually insane. So if you've been thinking or feeling like you need a break or want a break from social media, don't be scared to step away. I mean, especially if it's going to be for like 2 weeks or less, you don't need to tell anyone about that. You don't need to explain yourself. You can just log off. Something else that's really helped me with procrastinating and actually getting things done at the time that I say that I want to get them done is by buying a digital timer. And if you're thinking, Austen, did you forget that there is a timer on your phone that is free? No, I didn't forget, but did you not just listen to the last, 9 minutes of this episode where we discussed ways to put the phone down more and focus up? That's what I thought. So I went on Amazon.com and I purchased this digital kitchen timer. You can see if you're watching on YouTube. And this is like an analog timer. It makes no sound. It is super unintrusive. You can just press to start and pause. You twist the side to adjust the time, and you can set it for any amount of time that you want. And I like this again because I can just glance off to the side and see how much time is left, but it doesn't mean that I have to have my phone physically in front of me acting as a timer for a time block task. Now, I will say, I don't find that the digital timer works well for tasks like editing a YouTube video. Like, that is just going to take as long as it takes. I don't really have a set time in mind when I sit down to edit something like that. But one thing that I find I get distracted while doing kind of easily is writing my email newsletter. And it's not because I don't look forward to writing my email newsletter. It's just one of those things that, like, I'm writing in ConvertKit. There are other tabs open. I am going to grab a video link from YouTube and, oh, I have a comment on YouTube I should reply to. Like, that is something that I can do in like 30 minutes to an hour max if I just sit down and actually do it. And sometimes even just setting the timer for 15 minutes will help me get like 90% of it done. And from there, I can just go in and refine it. Oh, why was I rambling on about this here? I can cut that. Oh, I should add in this other thought that I had here. It just truly like speeds up and streamlines that process for me. And I end up wasting so much less time because I am intentionally trying to get that done in a certain block of time. So I personally find this works well for any tasks that fall like under an hour. I feel like a 20-minute task is good with the timer, a 30-minute task, maybe even a 45-minute task. I feel like any task that take longer than that, it's a little bit hard to focus for that amount of time. I mean, we're only human. Even if you have to get up every hour to refill your Stanley or go to the bathroom, like that's just part of being a human. But for me, that is just such an easy way to pick a block of time. And like I said, in most cases, I get a good majority of the task done, even if it's not 100% perfect, and I end up wasting less time on the back end. Now, all of these are helpful tips, but the one thing that really can take this to the next level is if you can take all of these different things, like reviewing your goals, setting priorities, eliminating distractions, and not just do them in a one off capacity, but really turn them into habits. And with that, I wanted to take a small anecdote from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. I actually don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast yet. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend. I will actually link both this and Uptime in the show notes as well. But what I love about Atomic Habits is that it just makes everything really simple and easy to follow and easy to understand. It's not like shaming you for having bad habits or making you feel bad if you haven't accomplished goals. It's kind of taking a reasonable approach and saying, here's a reason why you probably haven't done this yet, or here is how you can truly make the time to get this task done. So, the anecdote that I wanted to share from the book was about this one guy who really wanted to start working out more, right? That's like kind of a classic goal that people have for themselves. So this guy, what did he do? He started driving to the gym and staying in the gym for 5 minutes every morning. And you might be thinking, well, 5 minutes, like that's not going to change anything being in the gym for 5 minutes, even if you're sprinting, for those 5 minutes straight. That's not going to be nearly as effective as like a 30-minute workout, a 45-minute workout, a 60-minute workout. Why would you even bother going if you're just going to go for 5 minutes? And it was actually less about the 5-minute workout and more about getting into the habit of going to the gym at all. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is actually just start doing that thing and training your body to, at the same time, on certain days, say, okay, like it's Monday morning, we go to the gym on Monday mornings. Because once you're there, I mean, you might stay at the gym for your 5 minutes like you promised you would and then leave. But really, once you're there, don't you think maybe you could stay for 10 minutes or even 20 minutes if you're feeling good that day? It's just rewriting the framework, less to be about, oh, I have to go work out this morning, and more about, oh, I get in the car and I drive 10 minutes to the gym. Like that is just such an easier mental load to think about versus, oh, I have to go work out. I'm so tired. I don't want to lift weights. Like, simplify it and say, right now, it's just about getting myself to the gym. And I literally have this problem too, which is actually why we have the Peloton, because now I've eliminated the conversation of, oh, I have to go to the gym. I don't even have to go anywhere. All I have to do is walk 20 yards through the living room to the Peloton bike, and I don't have any excuse after that. But even for me with the Peloton, like I didn't start out doing 3 workouts a week that were as long as the ones that I do now. I started out with just getting on the bike 3 times a week for however long I could that day. So I really just wanted to share that, especially if you feel like you have a bigger goal that you didn't get to this year that you're down on yourself about. Just make it easier to get to the goal. Like I said earlier, if your goal was to launch a podcast this year and you didn't get around to it, make it a goal to figure out the name by the end of the year, or brainstorm the first 3 episode ideas, or even record the first 3 episodes so that when you actually launch, you have some stuff pre-recorded that you're able to schedule out, so you don't have to worry about publishing weekly content and maintaining all of that while you're promoting the podcast and getting feedback from listeners all at once. You're setting yourself up more for success by planning ahead and by laying the groundwork so that then later when you actually do launch, you're going to be glad you took the time to come up with the right name and find the right branding and zone in on what you actually want to do. I would definitely love to hear from you about some of your goals for the rest of the year, so please feel free to reach out to me. Links are always in the show notes for how you can do so. Thank you so much for listening. And as a reminder, you can support Create and Consume for free by doing any of the following. You can leave us Apple and Spotify ratings and reviews. You can like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're watching over on YouTube. You can follow along at Create and Consume Pod on Instagram and TikTok. You could send this episode to a friend who might enjoy it. And don't forget to check out createandconsumepodcast.com for episode recaps and more. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.